of God, most merciful, ever merciful, and may God's peace and blessings be upon His holy Prophet Muhammad and the purified members of his household and progeny. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajahum. Brothers, sisters, dear respected viewers, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And welcome to this latest, newest installment in this series that we're going through that has to do with the very crucial, important topic of the afterlife. The session for today's discussion is supposed to be centered on some of the main objections and concerns and questions that we encounter in the books of theology, of ilm al-kalam, of beliefs, Islamic beliefs. When we go through them and we see what the philosophers and what the mutakallimin have written, what some of the scholars have written, and the answers they've provided, we find a number of objections / questions that were raised, and the manner in which they were addressed, of course, will differ from one scholar to another, and more significantly from one school of scholars to another school of scholars. But I thought that, the discussion that we presented until now, perhaps related to this topic and the main objections and the answers provided to them, maybe we went a little bit quickly. So we want to make sure that, I want to feel confident and comfortable knowing that you are at least aware of, the main topic as it is explained and as it is presented in the books of ilm al-kalam, of aqa'id. As I promised you from the beginning, if I felt that maybe the curriculum that we're following has some gaps or is lacking in certain areas, I will try to highlight those to you. And when it is possible, and we have a little bit of time and the timing works out in the presentation and the order, the sequence of what we're presenting, if all of it is working out properly, then in those cases we are trying to supplement what we can, where we can, so that you get a more fulsome discussion and presentation of the topic. And so today's lecture is supposed to be very much in that vein, in that we're supplementing what we presented based on the curriculum with maybe some points that are not usually addressed in this specific curriculum that we're following, but you will find them in classic works of aqa'id and ilm al-kalam. So at least you have a good awareness and knowledge of them. So the session is simply called Questions and Objections. Of course, the question can be asked in a way that is, sincere, we're really wondering and we're trying to find the answer, or it could be a hypothetical, or it could be an actual objection. So regardless of how you look at it, so it could be considered, theoretical, hypothetical questions related to the topic of the resurrection, or we can consider them directly as objections, as we have seen. And that's why we said that this is a proper place for us to discuss these. So maybe very quickly, a recap. I don't know if, a recap of what we've presented until now, so that this discussion is understood in its proper context. We began with an explanation of the importance of this topic, and we said that it doesn't only have a theoretical place, it doesn't only hold a theoretical place in our system of belief, so that a system of belief would be considered lacking, it would be considered incomplete if it does not address the topic of the resurrection. If you as a believer, or even as a human being, you haven't reached your conclusions about what happens after you die and what kind of world awaits you, if any, or not, then you do not really have a fulsome system of beliefs. You don't really have a full worldview. There are gaps, and you have to decide how you're going to address those. And based on everything we said, it would not be considered acceptable for a human being to simply put all of that aside and say that I'm going to be completely agnostic, as they say, because these are unknowns. It's impossible to reach the truth. There are too many things to study. We've covered all of these objections and questions until now, so we're not going to repeat those. But the bottom line is, we do not think that it is possible for someone to live a fully human life without actually addressing these main existential issues that every human being should be dealing with. And that includes what happens after we die. Where am I going? So where did I come from? What am I doing here? And where am I going? Where am I headed? And this is the question that is answered by this theme of resurrection, al-ma'ad, as it's commonly referred to. So we also said, though, in addition to all of this and complementing our worldview, it also is going to give meaning to every action that we're going to take and every decision that we have to make in this life. Everything is going to depend on the answers that we gave to these questions. Depending on how you answered whether there is an afterlife or not, your actions in this life should not be the same. They will change. Once this is well understood, we spent a couple of lectures trying to understand a topic that, although maybe not directly related to the afterlife, it is necessary to reach a conclusion about it before you can jump into the topic. You're going to need this as an ingredient in everything that will come afterwards regarding the afterlife. So we decided to look at it right from the beginning, and this is the topic of the soul. Does the soul exist? What is it? What's the relationship between you and the soul, between the body and the soul? Are we more or not than the body? So we went through all of this, and we presented various arguments and various parts of, let's consider it evidence, to better understand what the soul is. And we presented kind of a rational / scientific points. And we also presented some points from the scripture, from the Holy Quran, mainly. And with all of that, we should have reached a conclusion, therefore, that the soul exists, one, and two, that in addition to the fact that it exists, it is what allows you to recognize your identity, that you are one unit, despite all the changes that occur to you in your life, in your existence. This is what basically holds all of your experience together as one entity and allows you to experience the world as one thing. And more than that, so that's an extremely important point. And even more importantly, this is who you truly are. Who you truly are is not defined by the body you have, which may change and which does in fact change. And so what's left is this soul, what we refer to as the soul. It's an immaterial aspect, dimension, part of who you are. In fact, it is who you are, and the body becomes an instrument that allows this true you to go about in this world, go about and interact with the material world in which we live. Okay, so we went through all of this, and once all of this is understood, we started looking at this notion. Once the topic of the soul is well understood, we went back to the main topic, which is the afterlife. And we said there are a couple of main arguments that we can use to properly explain with reason the importance, and not only the importance, but the necessity of the afterlife. And we brought it down to two main arguments. Those are the ones that we presented, and those are the divine justice on one side. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is just, and if you look at the state of the world, you see that it is not a just world. And so this cannot be the be-all, end-all. We need another thing to re-establish divine justice. So that's one. And two, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has wisdom. So he acts with purpose. And without some sort of conclusion to what's happening in this world, then this world would be kind of left purposeless, and our creation would be purposeless. Those are the main arguments. And of course, we presented all sorts of different variants that fall under those big arguments, including, I think, an important topic and a very relevant topic nowadays, which is it still possible to find meaning in a world that does not have an afterlife? As a human being, and we looked at the absurdism mentality or school of thought, even the philosophical school of thought, how it was basically kind of derived out of existentialism, which was trying to find meaning to life and the human experience. And if you are not able to get beyond this world, you're stuck in this world, then it would be very difficult to find any meaning, and therefore you fall into absurdism. In any case, we're not going to repeat all of that. Inshallah, it was well understood. And inshallah, we have a little bit of time today to take some questions related to that, if there are any. From there, we said, okay, now that we have established all of this based on reason, we want now to turn to the Holy Quran. And the reason, the true reason for this is, and this is a topic that has come back again and again throughout this entire series on theology that we've had, and this is the place of reason versus the place of scripture when it comes to beliefs, religious beliefs. And we are doing what we can to establish the rational foundations for our beliefs. But this is where you have to recognize where reason can play a role and reach valid, conclusive results, and where it no longer has the tools. Reason alone and your empirical senses are no longer sufficient to allow you to reach certain conclusions, because they are beyond your capacity. They are beyond the capacity of the tools that you were given to reach truths. You need additional sources of knowledge. And we've talked about this, and we said that's where we fall into the need for revelation, this additional source of knowledge that goes beyond what reason can say and what the senses can tell us. And so the details, once we get into the details of the afterlife, this is where reason does not have any tools to be able to say, this is how it's going to happen or not. All reason can say is what we've said until now. There needs to be an afterlife. There needs to be something that reestablishes purposeness and that reestablishes divine justice. But the how of it, the exact details of how this is going to unfold, for instance, reason cannot reach a decisive conclusion about this. You need, revelation. You need Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to tell you through the prophets, and this is what's awaiting you once you die. This is what the world that is awaiting you looks like. This is what you need to do here so that you get whatever there. Okay, and inshallah we're going to get into all those details. But the point we're trying to make right now is those details cannot be reached simply by looking at reason and say philosophical or theological arguments and evidence. So with all of that, we began by looking at the Holy Quran, and we said the verses of the Holy Quran fall into the manner in which we presented it. They fall into 5 big categories. And the 5 categories are not just random categories, there's a logic to them. So we have to present them in a certain sequence. We said the first verses of the Holy Quran establish a principle, and then they apply that principle to the topic of the afterlife. And the principle is, in important matters, the Holy Quran wants human beings to have a solid foundation and a real reason for believing what they believe in, for doing what they do. The Holy Quran constantly asks, what is your proof? If you have a proof for this, bring it forward so that we may discuss, so that we may see, is it a real proof or not? And just seeing what your parents did, for instance, that's not enough of a proof. It needs to be logical. It needs to be convincing. It needs to either come from, that's why the Quran often refers to it as Sultan and Mubin. It needs to be a very strong, evident proof for whatever you happen to believe in and therefore act upon. Okay, so then this is applied to the afterlife. And the Quran shows that those who want to deny the afterlife do not have any proof for doing that. So right from the beginning, it basically disarms them. It takes away the main weapon that you could have as a denier, as someone who wants to object. Your only real weapon should be your evidence, your argument. And the Holy Quran begins by showing that there is no argument. So the best that you could do, and we spend time on that, and then we explain that it's as though the Quran recognizes that the best you can do as a denier is basically say it seems very unlikely that human beings who die and their bodies decompose would be brought back from the dead, and then they would be resurrected and go through a judgment and an afterlife and so on and so forth. And so this unlikelihood is taken by the Holy Quran and shown that even this unlikelihood is not good enough. And then the Quran gives examples to show that this unlikelihood is actually not that unlikely. It's not that unlikely that there is a resurrection, there is a life after death, that you are brought back in. And the Quran gives one example after another, things that we encounter and see in our daily lives. And we talked about the cycles of nature and the seasons and all of that, our own sleep and the manner it works and how the Quran talks about it. And then the Quran also gave other examples. So the sleepers of the cave, people who were brought back from the dead, Prophet Isa alayhi salam, who as one of his main miracles brings people back from the dead. So the Holy Quran gives these examples, and one of them is building on the previous to show the complexity, bringing logic all the way to, therefore, human beings can and will be resurrected in the afterlife. And it's not difficult, and it's not beyond God's power or God's knowledge. Once this is done, then we said we want to look at, maybe someone after all of this would say, okay, but I still have some objections. And so we looked at 4 objections. Those 4 objections are the ones that we covered in the last lecture, and we said we want to supplement them with what we're going to be saying today. So what we're going to be saying today may have a little bit of an overlap with what we covered, and it will also cover some points that will be addressed in more detail in later lectures. But it's a good place to kind of bring all of it together in the format of objections and questions. So this is why we're doing it at this place and in this time and at this point in the lectures. The next 2 topics, inshallah, are going to be, now that we've established that there is no reason to reject resurrection and the afterlife, and in fact this unlikelihood is not unlikely. If your main argument is that it's unlikely, in fact it is not unlikely based on the examples that you saw, and your main objections have been answered, therefore the Quran goes on the attack. So after the Quran was in a defensive mode, trying to show that, you as a denier, let's see what you got, and then going through it, now that you're done, now I'm going to present my arguments, the Holy Quran says. And then this is where the Holy Quran presents 2 main arguments, or one argument which is the divine promise, which inshallah we will see in the next lecture, as well as, combined with that, as well as the actual rational arguments presented by the verses of the Quran about the afterlife being necessary. So beyond the fact that it is a divine promise, which is an argument in itself, there's also rational arguments presented by the Holy Quran, which we will see next time inshallah, that talk about the necessity of an afterlife to this world. Okay, so that's kind of the logical sequence. Now, the 4 objections that we saw last time were, how is it possible to bring back into existence something that has ceased to exist? And we're going to go back to it again today and look at it from another angle. How is it possible that a dead body returns back to life? And we're also going to go back to it a little bit today and talk about it. And then the 2 main headings that the author talked about, which is, he kind of lumped everything together under the 2 headings, which are the power of the Creator and the knowledge of the Creator, which need to be absolute, which need to be incomparable for all of this to work. And we said, and that's exactly what it is. And that's the type of Creator that we believe in. And therefore this, fantastical claims, because you need fantastical, unbelievably, absolute levels of power and knowledge to do all of this. We prove that this is actually the type of God or type of Creator we believe in, and therefore it is not that unlikely and it's not so fantastical as someone might think. And then maybe very quickly, in addition to the actual objections that we're going to go through, we said that there are main triggers sometimes for these objections. So this is also a little bit of a recap. And a lot of the objections actually derive out of those triggers. The first one has to do with the fact that, and of course, keeping in mind everything we're presenting, we're trying to show that this has a Quranic foundation. This is not a rational or purely rational discussion. All of this is We're trying to see what the Holy Quran says about this topic. So one type of rejection comes, or trigger for rejections, comes from the fact that human beings in general, and specific human beings who are too weak to get over this, want to live in the type of freedom that unrestricts, that allows them to live as freely as possible with regards to their desires, with regards to how they feel like living. This is normal. This is how we were created. But then this is where you have to decide, do I let these desires take over, or do I use my reason and do I use logic to use them in the appropriate way and not allow them to transgress over my rights, the rights of others, the rights of God, and so on and so forth. Okay, and so we went through that whole discussion. That's why I'm saying it's a recap, but I think we need to keep it in mind to understand where the objections come from. And so from the Holy Quran, we see, for instance, in chapter 75, verse 3 to 6, does a human being suppose that we cannot, or that we shall not, put together his bones? Yes, indeed, we are able to proportion even his fingertips. Rather, the human being desires to go on living viciously. Or, another translation, he desires to defile what lies before him. بَلْ يُرِيدُ الْإِنسَانُ لِيَفْجُرَ أَمَامَهُ. So this verse, and you cannot just look at بَلْ يُرِيدُ الْإِنسَانُ لِيَفْجُرَ أَمَامَهُ. You have to link it and see that in the two previous verses in Surah Al-Qiyamah, you see the Holy Quran making a clear link. If there's a reason why they are objecting to, there are people who are rejecting the idea of an afterlife, saying, how is it even possible that our bones are going to be brought back together? And so the verses respond directly to that. Does the human being suppose that we cannot, or that we shall not bring back together or put back together his bones? Yes, indeed, we are able. So obviously this is a direct answer, a direct response to an objection, that this is something not possible. So the Holy Quran responds, and then it gives the reason for where this came from, this objection came from. بَلْ يُرِيدُ الْإِنسَانُ لِيَفْجُرَ أَمَامَهُ. Rather, the human being desires to go on living, according to his own vicious desires or vile, whims and the freedom that he wants to have. Because the moment you accept that there's an afterlife, then you have to live in a certain way. It's going to bind you. You are going to have limitations, restrictions, responsibilities, and duties that you don't want to be bound by. So of course you're not going to open that door. You want to reject that. The second trigger, as we said, is there are a lot of people who have all sorts and shapes of power in this world. And the more of it you have, the more you may have an objection against something like the afterlife. And the Holy Quran, again, is very clear about this. And this is something that we see in everyday life. Power is addictive. Power is something that the more you have of, the more you want of. And historically, so people who study history and people who study society, you will see that the trend is, those who have power always do or act in a way that not only solidifies that power, but it increases that power and perpetuates it and removes it away from those who don't have it. But anyways, that's a whole discussion. It can be studied in sociology. There's a whole lot of work done on power relations and the place of power in all sorts of social theory and so on and so forth. But this is very clear. And the Holy Quran often refers to this from different angles, okay? And so it says, for instance, when it talks, chapter 23, verses 33 to 37, the elite of his people said, who were disbelievers and who denied the encounter of the hereafter or the afterlife, and whom we had given affluence. So they were living lives of luxury, living lives of comfort in the life of this world. What would they say? They would say, this is just a human being like you. He eats what you eat. He drinks what you drink. And therefore, and then you jump one verse. I didn't cite the whole. Verse 36 is missing. Verse 37 says, does he promise you that when you have died and become dust and bones, that you will indeed be raised from the dead? far-fetched is what you are promised. هيهات هيهات مما توعدون. Okay, this is something, it's so extremely fantastical that you should not even consider it. It is too far-fetched. And this is why we said, you know, really the argument of these people really is about far-fetched. It's about unlikelihood. There is nothing else that they can rest their case on. But notice here in this verse how the Holy Quran linked, who is it that's saying this? It's the people who have the power. It's the elites. It's those who have the nobility. It's those who have the decision-making power. And those are the people who rejected those claims, and they came at it from different angles. They want to make the people doubt about the prophethood of the prophet on one side, and then they go to the next point, and they want to reject the afterlife based on the fact that accepting it means a reduction of their power. Okay? And then finally, and this is perhaps more of an ideological reason, it's that denying the afterlife, rejecting the afterlife, may be something of a kind of a logical outcome. Because you've taken a certain ideological decision to start with, when those prophets are sent to you, when the truth is presented to you, that you say, this is just wrong. I will never accept this. Someone who is 100% entirely convinced and not open for debate, entirely convinced that religion is something that is man-made to control, you know, the weak or the masses or whatever. If you are completely stuck on that, no matter what is presented to you, you interpret it in that way. And this has existed in the past, and it continues to exist today. You watch certain, you know, debates with people like Richard Dawkins and others, they will openly say that, you know, what would it take you, if they were asked, what would it take for you to actually believe? Like, would you believe if a miracle happened? And he would say, yeah, I would believe. And then when he explains it, he'd say, I still wouldn't believe. And so this is where you see that, you know, this is someone who has taken a stubborn position. They have taken an ideological position against this worldview, this way of understanding the world with a God in the middle, with a God in the center. They are at war with that notion. They reject that notion. They're not open to having a God in no matter what shape or form you want to present it. There's a blockage there. And this is also, of course, going to trickle down into everything that is presented by religion, including something like an afterlife. Okay, so these become your main triggers for a lot of these objections. But now let's look at the objections themselves. So the main objections that we wanted to look at today very quickly, the first one is creation is supposed to be gradual. When we look at the manner in which things are created in this world, we see that everything happens over steps, over time. It's gradual. So is the resurrection also going to be gradual, or is it a one-time thing, spontaneous, immediate? The second question is, as we've seen, the bodies that we have are not fixed. They are not one body that we have our entire lives. The bodies are constantly changing to the point where we say that the entire body and everything in it has been replaced. Perhaps, you know, a couple of exceptions in there, some types of cells that may last longer, a lot longer, but in general, the entire body will have been replaced every 7 years or 10 years. So which of those bodies is going to be resurrected? And is that still fair or not? And we're going to go into the details of that. The third objection is it really possible to bring something that has ceased to exist into existence again? And as we said, we covered this, we're covering it from another angle today. Is there enough matter, content on this planet to bring back everyone that has ever existed, and perhaps even more than just the human beings? Okay, is there enough or not? Is there enough space when we look at the manner in which the Holy Quran talks about the resurrection and specifically the judgment? So everybody is brought at one place and one time. Is there enough space, even if this whole planet were to be used? Is there enough space for everyone that we're trying to bring back? And then there is the famous objection of the eater and the eaten. I don't know if you've heard about it or not. Shubhat al-akil wal-ma'kul. And we're going to see what that is about and what the answers are for this. And then how can the human being exist eternally especially with a body, how can the body of a human being exist for all of eternity in the afterlife when we know in this world that matter cannot exist forever? And as we said, a lot of these may look like they're repetitions, but inshallah, you'll see how they're being presented in a slightly different twist or from a different angle. And also, some of these are going to be covered in more detail or maybe perhaps from other angles in lectures to come. And of course, as we said, what I'm trying to do here is to basically take you back. A lot of these have been objections or questions that you find in very, very old books of aqa'id and ilm al-kalam in general. Some of these are 10 centuries or more old, and some of them are a little bit more recent, or there's a more recent formulation to them. So I think at the end of this, the hope is that you can say we've kind of covered the main objections, we've answered them, and we feel comfortable moving on with this topic. So the first question, will the resurrection be gradual? So as we said, when we look at this world, we see that the creation, the act of creation, when we look at anything that comes into existence in our world, it doesn't happen spontaneously. It happens over time. There are steps, there are premises. You have to do certain things to reach certain conclusions. Let's say a being, for it to be born, well, there are many, many factors and ingredients and steps that have to take place first before that entity is born into this world. So what about the afterlife? So the first question here is, or the first point of note is that this was not about a logical impossibility. It is logically possible. It's just when we look at the manner in which this world is built and the natural order of things, we see that this is not how things generally work in this world. We need steps. It's not spontaneous. And the existence of a human being specifically depends on certain factors, certain conditions, certain steps have to be taken and put in place before that human being exists. So what happens when we go to the afterlife? The short answer to this, so that we don't spend too much time on any of these, the short answer to this is that when we go to the Holy Quran, reminder, this is all from the Holy Quran, when we go from the Holy Quran, it tells us very clearly, and of his signs is that the sky and the earth stand by his command. And then when he calls you forth from the earth, a single call, فَإِذَا دَعَاكُمْ دَعْوَةً مِنَ الْأَرْضِ, behold, you will come forth. That's the short answer. Do you get the impression when you hear this verse that this is something gradual or that it's all happening at once? Clearly, all happening at once. You are called, you obey the call. This is a different world, a different dimension. Now, in addition, there are other verses that were used by some of our scholars. They say, when you look at them, they also give you the impression that this is not gradual. Many, many verses. One of them, for instance, is 6:31. They are certainly losers, those who deny the encounter with Allah. When the hour overtakes them suddenly, they will say, alas for us, for what we neglected about this. And they will bear their burdens on their backs. Look, evil is what they bear. And when you look at these verses, and there's many of them, this is one example, the scholars say there's something that's happening in one shot. The weakness of this that I wanted to add is you have to be careful which verses you're using, because in a lot of these verses, it seems like the Holy Quran is talking about what's happening in this world. When the hour comes, when this world is ending, then it's happening in a very sudden way. And because of that, this is how these people are reacting. This is different than saying, and therefore the resurrection is all in one shot. And maybe one interpretation would be that the end of this world and the afterlife all are kind of one event. You can look at it from one side or the other. But the truth is it's not. Even if you go into the narrations, you'll see that this world will end, and we'll go through some of the examples of how this is going to end. And this is going to be a discussion we're leaving for later in detail. But this world will end. And then there's going to be, let's call it a gap, a time lapse that goes by, and then the afterlife begins. And this means whatever shape or form, whatever the nature of this is, we cannot say that these verses are referring to the spontaneous, immediate resurrection when they're talking about perhaps what's happening in this world and how people are reacting, especially people who denied the afterlife, how they're reacting when they're realizing that this world is ending. Okay? So these are maybe two quick points that we wanted to mention about this. The rest, I think we can skip over, which is the reminders, because as we said, we already talked about this in the last lesson. And we said the laws of nature that we know, in addition to everything we said, this is based on the idea that when you see this world, you see that everything happens in steps. It's because you have a certain understanding of the natural order of things. Well, who says that the same natural order is going to be awaiting you in the afterlife? That's one. So don't try to apply it as is. Two, all of this is stemming from materialism. You're still thinking about a human being being nothing more than a body. And when you see the body, you see that it's something that needs to come into existence with time, and it needs certain steps and certain ingredients. You're not thinking about more than just a body. You're really fixated on just a physical component. And then the third is, why do you think that you already understand this natural order completely and absolutely? Did we not go through a number of examples to show that perhaps even this knowledge of yours is actually deficient and lacking and incomplete? Otherwise, you would understand and you would know how, for instance, the birds were resurrected by Prophet Ibrahim, or how Prophet Isa alayhi salam brings people back from the dead. But because you can't, therefore you cannot just say, I already understand how things come into existence or come back to life in this world, and this is how it must happen because that's the only way things happen. Even in this world, that's not the only way things happen. That was the first objection or question. The second one is, as we said multiple times, when we look at our bodies, we see that they're always changing, and that a body is probably being completely and entirely renewed every 7 to 10 years, depending on which studies you look at. So if you take the example of a human being who has lived or is going to live for 80 years, let's say, an average lifespan, and in that case, based on those numbers, they would probably have something like 8 different bodies, entirely, completely different bodies that they've gone through. Okay, so which one of these bodies, which version of you, which physical version of you is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala going to bring back in the afterlife? And which one is going to be deserving of reward and punishment? Is it fair that I take a body that perhaps has not committed the sin yet? So the 40-year-old, when the body that committed the sin was 60, or the 20-year-old when the body that committed the sin is 40, and this is the body that comes back and I punish it, is it fair? It's not the same body that's being punished. It's not the same body also that's being rewarded. Which format, which one of these bodies is going to be punished and rewarded in a way that makes it fair? And one of the answers that was provided for this is that some scholars, some interpreters of the Quran have gone to certain verses of the Quran. I don't cite them here because I find the argument is rather weak, but I have the references if you want to go and take a look. 36:51 in Surah Yasin and Surah Taha 20:55. And those are examples of verses that were used to say that it's basically the last body that you had in this earth. When you left this world, that's a body that you will come back in. This is a body that deserves the punishment and the reward and going through the afterlife, because this is the body that represents your culmination. And we said from a scientific point of view, this is problematic. If you really understand, this may have worked way in the past, but today if you understand that the entire body is being completely replaced, then that is a different body than the one you had. Okay, that's one. Two, and this is I think the key, there's an assumption here. In this objection or this question, the assumption is that it has to be the same body that performed the good or performed the evil that must come back for the judgment. And again, this is stemming from a very materialist worldview, because we said, based on our understanding of the soul, who you truly are, the place that holds together your feelings, your will, your reward and punishment, that your humiliation or your pride, whatever it may be, it's all in the soul. And the body is the instrument. Okay? You have a body, the Quran says there is a body. It does not need to be the exact same body, and we're going to look at that from different angles today. Okay, but it does not need to be the exact same body that you had in this life. And once you understand this, this becomes a key that you can use to answer a lot of the objections against the afterlife for yourself and for others. So if the soul is the one that is really being rewarded and punishment, because it is the soul that made the decisions, it is the soul that earned the reward or the punishment, then in those cases, and all of that, when you put it together, you say that regardless of the body, regardless of the version of the body that you're using, so long as you have the right soul, then the reward or the punishment are taking place in the right way. Okay, so that's the second objection. The third one is the question or the objection about is it actually possible to bring something that has been annihilated, something that used to exist, taken into non-existence? Is it possible to bring it back into existence? Does that make sense or not? And as we said, you know, this is referred to in Arabic as i'adat al-ma'doom. So something that has become ma'doom. Adam is non-existent, something that absolutely does not exist anymore. If you've been taken into non-existence, how do you come back? The thing that comes back is no longer the same. It's a new creation. It's no longer the same entity that earned the reward or the punishment that is now being basically brought back. It's a different one that is being created, and that one that is being created is not the same. Therefore, it doesn't deserve the reward or punishment that you want to make it go through. And we said this objection stems from, again, two misunderstandings. The first one has to do with misunderstanding of death, and the second one is misunderstanding of the human being. When it comes to death, does a human's death equal to non-existence? And you know, we spent enough time on this that I think the answer should always be a quick and easy no. It's not that you cease to exist, it's that you no longer exist in this body, in this format, in this material world, in this way. But you don't cease to exist. So in appearance, you don't exist. But in truth, the soul is still there. Nothing has happened to the soul. It's just, it's no longer able to do anything through this body. That's all that happens when you die. And of course, it goes back to another type of realm or, you know, dimension. And so if this is the nature of death, then it's a complete misunderstanding, and therefore the rest of the objection doesn't work, because it's not a matter of non-existence. It's not that you went into non-existence. It's that you have a different type of existence because you're no longer able to control the body that you had. And as for the human being, again, if you think that a human being is only a body, and the body is no longer able to perform anything, any actions, and the body is going to decompose, then yeah, maybe you can say you've gone into non-existence in the future. And we're going to see that even that is not possible. But we said that the human being is not a body. The human being has a body, but the human being is first and foremost a soul. And it's the soul that is in the body that is in existence. And therefore, when you die, once again, to bring it back to the previous point, you don't cease to exist. The body's death does not mean non-existence for the human being. With that in mind, as some scholars have pointed out, even by the standards of the materialists, this objection does not hold. Because even if we want to follow the laws of nature, the laws of nature tell us that there is nothing that is ever destroyed. Once something exists, if something exists, it remains in existence in this world, right? This is the law of the conservation of energy. And so if you exist as an entity, maybe not in that shape or form, you cannot say that it has gone into non-existence. It's not in that way. It's been transformed. It has become something different, but you can't say that it has completely ceased to exist. So even by a materialist standard, it doesn't work. And furthermore, I think it's an interesting point. Perhaps this is one of the manifestations of a more abstract law that, you know, centuries before Lavoisier came out with his principle of the conservation of energy. So nothing is created, nothing is destroyed, everything's transformed. When Lavoisier came with this, if you go centuries before that, You will find in some philosophical works by Muslims that this is a well-known principle in Islamic philosophy, that once something is in existence, it cannot be taken into non-existence. So if you exist forever. It's just in what shape or form. Existence itself cannot fall into non-existence. That's a more, sophisticated, complex or advanced topic, but I think it's an interesting thing to keep in mind. So perhaps this is a more, the abstracted version of that law when it applies to matter and energy, because they want to limit all that exists to matter and energy. But in this principle, it goes way beyond just matter and energy. Maybe there are things that are not matter and energy. What about them? Do they exist or not? And what happens to them? Can they be destroyed or not? In any case, so the short answer to all of this is not a case of going into non-existence. So, you're not using the right terminology or the right notions for this objection. And then we went through the verses of the Quran that talk about this, so we will not repeat those, 32, 10, 11. The fourth objection is that there is not enough matter on this earth to return everyone. So if it is right that as they, go through their geological, archaeological, anthropological studies, and they conclude that human beings have been in existence for 2 million or more years, and you think that all those people have to be brought back and all these people have to be judged all at once, and that all those people are going to go to, heaven or hell depending on their actions, then to bring them back, you need enough content, you need enough matter, you need enough ingredients to put together those bodies once again. And of course, that will be an impossibly difficult task because there are too many people. So how will this work? So we can give the answer, and at the end I would say put all of this together, but the answers that have been given, let's put them into three big categories. The first are the answers or the points that have come to us from a more rational discussion. So first and foremost, we can't just say that everybody who has ever lived for the past 2 million to 3 million years. We don't know that. We don't have proof of who exactly is going to be brought back and in what way. Okay, so we can't just say everybody who has existed for the past 2 million years or 3 million or 3.5 million or 2.7 million, depending on the studies. It could be the past 5,000 years or 10,000 or 15,000. All of this is still being debated between historians and biologists and anthropologists on what constitutes the humanity that we know today biologically and culturally and so on and so forth. So that number is already questionable. But so that's one. Two, no one ever said that the bodies that are going to be given to us in the afterlife are going to be the exact bodies from every dimension in every way that we have in this world. So that you would, have hair as you have here and eyes like you have here and nose that. Who says that it is like that? This is not said in any way, anywhere. The scriptures don't refer and don't give us those types of details so that we just start assuming, what our size will be and our faculties are going to be and what we're going to look like. And we don't know. We know in general, based on what the Holy Quran says, that there is a spiritual and immaterial part of our existence in the afterlife that is there. And there's a corporeal or something that we would refer to today as physical, material entity to our existence there. But in what exact nature, we don't know. And we don't know those details. So the assumption here is everybody is coming back in the same exact body that they had in this life, and the same body with the same height and length and width and weight, all of the characteristics of that body. That doesn't work. Okay, no one said that. We don't have proof for that. Thirdly, we can actually imagine all sorts of scenarios where if Earth, this planet from which we are supposed to come back to life, requires more content, then that content is coming from somewhere. And I don't think it's that difficult for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, say, to use content from, say, other planets. And who knows at that point what that Earth will look like, how big or small it will be, and how it might be used to bring those people back to the dead. So from the dead. So in all of those, you know, different scenarios that we could come up with, there is no need for us to try to, you know, make it work one way or another. We know that in theory it could happen. We can come up with all sorts of scenarios to make it work. So I just want to make sure I'm not skipping anything. The bodies are created from it if needed without injustice because of the soul. So the point here, the nuance here is also that if we look at the bodies, the point that we're trying to make is we're trying to maximize the use of what's available on this planet and to bring back the entity, the body, as it was, as close as possible as it was. That's kind of the assumption. We don't know if that's required or not, okay? But the assumption is we are trying hard, you know, in our arguments, as scholars are trying hard to bring back those entities. But in cases where, let's say, there is not enough, well, what's the problem if, say, you know, there was a supplementation from other matter to create those bodies? What's the issue? Does it really go against divine justice to punish someone by giving them a body because there's not enough subject matter to you know, create the new body, the resurrected body? Is that really contradictory with divine wisdom? No, it's not. Or divine knowledge or divine justice. No, it's not. And the short answer is because it's the soul. So long as we have the same soul, then the body is secondary. And you may have a completely different body. You may have a part of a body that has come from the original and another supplemented, but it still works. The argument still works, okay? From a scientific point of view, and this is where it gets a little bit more, say, real and mathematical if we wanted to, for those interested in this kind of argument. First of all, Earth is constantly bombarded by, you know, debris, dust, meteorites, so on and so forth from space. If you go on NASA's website, I went on it today just to see, I found a couple of articles. The articles that talk about the least, say they're on average, there are about 50 tons of new dust added to Earth from space on a daily basis, on average. Okay, and in other articles, they say on average it's about 100 tons. So let's say anywhere between 50 and 100 tons of matter are added to Earth every day. How many human beings could you create with that? A lot. Okay, exactly how much, I don't know. But that's the other question. No one has actually been able to say how much, you know, matter from Earth do I need to create that human being. But let's just go with the flow and with the argument. The person who has made this claim obviously has not made any real mathematical calculations, because if you look at those who have made some calculations, they basically tell us today, if you wanted to take human beings and, you know, crush them together, compact them so that, you know, their bodies are intact. You're not destroying any bodies. You're not squishing them. You're just putting them one beside the other so that they're stuck together like sardines, okay? And you would put them in the earth. You could fit all the human beings on the planet today, the 7 to 8 billion people that we have on the planet, you could fit them all in 1 cubic kilometer. And today, so that's for everybody that we currently have. And we are at the point in history, based on everything we know, where we've had the most human beings on this planet at a given time. So if you go back, you see that exponentially, there has been exponential growth of population over the past little while. And let's say you go back in history. Well, we have if you have 1 cubic kilometer, you can fit almost 8 billion or around 8 billion people on it. What if you have 1 trillion cubic kilometers, which is the size of the Earth? Are we still going to say there is not enough content to bring back all those people from the dead? I think that is the easy way to dismiss this argument if we really want to get stuck on the math of it. Okay, and of course the same can be done. So the same can be done with water, the same can be done with air and other ingredients. So whatever is in the air that is required to create a human being, all the ingredients required are available. Okay, and then when you go back to the scripture, what does the scripture say about this? So some interpreters have gone into this argument and they've said, one way to look at this is to say, We can combine a couple of verses together and we can start seeing that maybe it's actually referring to this specifically. So in one verse, for instance, we're told in 84:3, we're told when the earth is spread out, وَإِذَا الْأَرْضُ مُدَّتْ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says on that day, when Yawm al-Qiyamah happens, the day of judgment happens, the earth will be spread out. It's like it's going to be extended. Okay? In another verse, we're also told, or a couple of verses, in 69:14, we're told, when the trumpet is blown with a single blast, and the earth and the mountains are lifted, then ground up in a single grinding. فَإِذَا نُفِخَ فِي الصُّورِ نَفْخَةٌ وَاحِدَةٌ وَحُمِلَتِ الْأَرْضُ وَالْجِبَالُ فَدُكَّتَا دَكَّةً وَاحِدَةً. Basically, earth and the mountains are pulverized into dust or into powder. That's what the verse is saying. This is when the trumpet is, the first blow, it happens, and the blast of the trumpet happens. This world is annihilated, and this earth and the mountains are completely pulverized. If you take those two verses together, some interpreters have said it's kind of saying, well, we're preparing the grounds to have the ingredients so that we create you back again from them. Okay, so some interpreters have said that. I'm just adding it in there so that you have the complete discussion and the complete picture. The next question: is there enough space for everyone to be brought back together in one plane, in one place, at one time, to be judged? The Holy Quran seems to be saying this very directly. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in 77:38, it says, this is the day of judgment. هَذَا يَوْمُ الْفَصْلِ. We have gathered you and the ancients. So you and everybody who has ever existed before you are all going to be gathered on this day at this time all together for the distinction, for the judgment. Okay, this is what's going to separate some from some. Is there enough square kilometers on this planet to bring everyone back, to stand in one place at one time? So one is, we've already given those types of explanations. Sometimes I think the math is not working out for some people. One. Two, in addition to all of this, the idea here, the assumption here for this type of objection or rejection or question is that you're assuming that we're still in the same type of world, when clearly the Holy Quran says again and again and again that this world that you know is no longer going to exist. So I've split the verses into three categories. Some verses of the Holy Quran, when they talk about this world, they make it clear that it is going to have, it's walking or it's moving towards an end. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created this world towards a very specific end. It will end at a point in time and in a certain way. That's all those verses say. Other verses, another group of verses in the Quran, are very clear that this world is going to be, in one word, it's going to be completely destroyed. It's going to be annihilated. The third category of verses explain to us that the order of things that we know in this world is going to be replaced by another order of things. It's not that there are no laws, it's that there are different laws and different realities that are going to be put in place in the next world, in the afterlife. So let's look at the verses of the Quran that talk about this. And once this is understood, then the answer to this question becomes clear. Is it really true that there is not enough space to bring everyone back? The first verses, the ones that talk about how this world is temporary and going towards the end for which it was created. The first verse says, it is Allah who raised the heavens without any pillars that you see, and then presided over the throne. He disposed the sun and the moon, each moving towards a specified term. The sun and the moon have a specified term. I'm not going to continue with the Surah Al-Ra'd 13:2. The next verse, Surah Al-Rum 38. Have they not reflected in their own souls? Allah did not create the heavens and the earth and whatever is between them except with reason and for a specified term. Indeed, many of the people disbelieve in the encounter with their Lord. So again, very clearly, everything in the heavens and the earth and whatever is between them has been created for a specified term. There's an end date to this. In another verse, Surah Al-Ahqaf 46:3, we did not create the heavens and the earth and whatever is between them, except with reason and for a specified term. Yet the faithless are disregardful of what they are warned. So these are types of verses that clearly state that everything that has been created with an end. There is an end date and a manner in which it's going to basically run out its course and its existence. The second set of verses talk about how this world, it's not just going to end, it's going to be completely destroyed. In some verses it says, for instance, in Surah Al-Waqa'ah, when the earth is shaken a violent shaking, and the mountains are pulverized to powder. In another verse in Surah Al-Tur, it says, on the day the sky will move violently, or will sway back and forth, or will churn a great churning. Okay, تَمُورُ السَّمَاءُ مَوْرًا. And the mountains will move with an awful motion. And other verses in Surah Al-Infitar, and there are many verses, especially in Juz' Amma, in the third last part of the Quran, where there's a lot of vivid descriptions of Yawm al-Qiyamah, when the sky is cleft or torn apart. Surah Al-Infitar, إِذَا السَّمَاءُ انْفَطَرَتْ. Okay, imagine something that shatters or breaks. When the sky is cleft asunder, when the stars are scattered, when the oceans are exploded or burst forth. This is in Surah Al-Infitar. In Surah Al-Inshiqaq, إِذَا السَّمَاءُ انشَقَّتْ. So when the sky is ripped apart. In Surah Al-Takwir, when the sun is wound up, when the stars fade, they dim out, when the mountains are set in fast motion, when the oceans are set afire. Okay, so this is how the Holy Quran talks about what's happening to this world as it prepares to become the afterlife. So clearly everything is being destroyed. Everything that we know is being destroyed. Even those things that we consider the fixtures. Okay, the heavens and the mountains and the oceans and so on and so forth. And then the last group of verses, that all of this is going to be replaced. The day the earth is transformed into another earth and the heavens, and they are presented before Allah. The day the earth is transformed into another earth and the heavens. So the heavens as well are going to be transformed into another heavens. So when you put all of this together, clearly we are moving into a different dimension with a different natural order, with different laws in place. You can't assume that because you know something in this world that it's going to look the same or feel the same or be experienced the same or have the same size or the same quantity or quality or whatever as you find in this world in the afterlife. The objection of the eater and the eaten. One of the oldest and one of the most problematic objections that we find in the books of Kalam. I'm not going to go in all of its formulations and all of the details around it. I'm going to give you a couple of, formulations. So just so that you know what it's about and what's in the books and how it's been responded to. It does have relevance today, but maybe perhaps not in the same exact manner it's been presented. So what's the objection? The objection is, imagine for a second that you have a person A who consumes a person B. They eat them. A person eats the body of another person. The question is, which of the two bodies is going to be resurrected? Are they both going to be resurrected? Is only one of them going to be resurrected? And which one is it? Is it the one who was eaten or the one who ate? It's very problematic when it comes to the one who was eaten. The one who ate, maybe a little bit less problematic, except in the second formulation, we'll see why it's problematic. If we say that which one is going to be resurrected, if it only A or only B, then we have an issue. Resurrection is supposed to be for everyone. If we say that it's the person who was eaten, then they were eaten. How are they being brought back when they are now part of another body? And if they are both going to be brought back, then how are they both brought back when one of them is consumed by the other? And if we say none of them is going to be brought back, then that's completely rejected. The second formulation of this is when they say, imagine a person A who is supposed to be a disbeliever, therefore someone who should end up in hell, who consumes, who eats a believer. Person B is a believer who is supposed to go to heaven. And so if the disbeliever eats the person who is a believer, and they go to the afterlife, and they're resurrected in that body, then they have in them the body of the person who was eaten and who was a believer, and that it is unfair that the body parts of the believer are going to be punished in the punishment of reserved for the disbeliever. That's basically the second formulation of it. Now, first and foremost, hopefully it's very clear that no one is eating anyone. There is no actual consumption of human beings by others unless you're very deranged or living in an extreme barbaric land. But generally speaking, that's not the issue. And I think so a more modern formulation of this objection would be that imagine a human being who passes away, who dies, and at some point their body, through, naturally, as we do when we bury people or not, at some point the body is going to return to this land and it's going to decompose, to this planet, and it's going to decompose. And that decomposed body is going to be what makes up plants. And those plants are going to be consumed by animals. And you as a human being, you may be consuming the plants or the animals whose bodies were formed from the decomposed bodies, the deceased bodies of other people. And so this is perhaps a more modern version of this objection, of this question, okay? So how do we answer this? Where are the big problems and how do we answer this? And of course, there's not enough time to go through all the details. We'll go quickly over it. The first point is any of the previous bodies would work. Okay, so this is what we addressed in question 2 when we talked about which one of the bodies is going to be resurrected. We said the point of the resurrection is about the soul. Okay, so the soul is going to be the one deserving the reward, deserving of the punishment, and we just need a body with it because scripture tells us we are going to have bodies in the afterlife as well. Okay, so any of the previous bodies would work. And what do we mean? Okay, so let's say the person who was eaten, the person who died, they died at some point. That, let's say they were 40 years old. Well, if the body is being completely replaced every 10 years, then the fourth body was eaten, but there's 3 more bodies that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could use to bring that person back, if this is how they want to interpret it. Okay, so any of the bodies would work. That's not an issue. That's one. And as we said, it's not really about which body you were in. A second point to this is, even if you are consumed, your body is consumed by someone. We know that when you eat food, the majority of the food you eat is actually released by the body and it's not absorbed. Okay, so even as an objection, theoretically, it does not really work. You're not keeping 100% of what you're eating inside you. Thirdly, for some reason, there's this fixation that we have, and a lot of ilm al-kalam is based on this, and I don't want to go on a tangent here, that we're really trying to preserve in the arguments and in the discussions, we're really trying to preserve as much of the original body as we can. And we don't need to do that. Okay, if we can, great. If there is enough matter that we can put together, bring it back together as it was, and we have the same original body, great. But if we fail to do that, what's the problem? There's no issue. So long as we said again and again, so long as the soul is there, we don't have an issue. There is no necessity to bring that same exact body entirely as it was. Okay? And to add to that, if you actually understand what the science says and the whole body is actually being replaced and it's constantly in change, there's never going to be a situation where you have a full human being. You'd basically have to bring back all of the cells that ever made up the human being through their entire life to say, accurately and precisely, we have the exact full human being. You'd have to put all of that back together, which doesn't work. Okay, so it's even in theory impossible. And then once again, as we said, the soul is key, as we said again and again. There are verses of the Holy Quran, and this is the key, and this is where I'm trying to bring it back to the Holy Quran. There are verses in the Holy Quran that seem to tell us that It is not the exact same body that is going to be recreated. What is going to be recreated is the likeness of it. And these are two completely different things. Notice the verse in the Quran in Surah Yasin, for instance, when it says, is not he who created the heavens and the earth not able to create the like of them? The like of them, not to recreate them again. Could he not create the like of them? يَخْلُقَ مِثْلَهُم. Okay, in Surah Yasin. And then you combine this with a narration from Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. For instance, there are many. In one narration, he says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he holds the souls. So this is at the moment of death. He holds the souls and he puts them, once it's the time for resurrection, and he puts them in the likeness of what they were in this life, so that they eat and drink. And if someone were to enter and look at them, they would recognize them because of the likeness of what they were in this life. And the Imam talks about this. He says there's a method, okay, mithliyah. Imam is saying that he will make them look, when someone looks at them, you would say, yeah, I recognize that's the same person. It doesn't mean that they are in the same material body that they were. How Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does this, I don't know. But clearly, there's a difference between having to bring back the exact same body and creating the likeness of it. Okay, so this is, I think, an important point to keep in mind. And once again, this idea of this whole objection about the eater and the eaten stems once again from a very materialist worldview, that the human being has been reduced to the body. And because of this, it creates all these issues. Well, you know, if you understand what we said until now, you'd also understand that, let's say you were in a body in this world that because of an injury or because of a defect, you were born with a limb missing, or, you know, because of an injury, something got burned, something got cut, something got amputated, whatever it may be. Does it mean that this is exactly how you have to look like in the afterlife? No. Does this cause an objection? No, because it's about the soul. So you may come back in a different body. Those injuries, defects, whatever they may be, are probably going to not exist in the afterlife, and it's not an issue. And if you take the second formulation is specifically around, is it fair for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to punish, let's say, the body parts, the organs that were consumed by the disbeliever, because the disbeliever is being punished when they belong to a believer? And the short answer is, once again, you are too fixated on the materialist argument and worldview. And look at the examples, especially in our world today, with all of the, you know, the organ transplants that we see, for instance. If someone has a kidney from someone else, and that person, the person who received the kidney, let's say they commit a huge crime, and then they have to be, executed at the end of their sentence. Do we say that it's not fair to the kidney of that person? The kidney is not. Are you going to associate that kidney back with the person who was to whom it belonged in the first place? No. You're going to say that the moment it's part of the other person, that's where it belongs, and it doesn't impact or affect the identity of the first person. So things to keep in mind. There's a lot more we can say here, but I'm running out of time. I want to end it very quickly. How can the human being become eternal when matter is not? The objection is that when we look at matter in general, we see that matter cannot keep its composition, cannot keep its characteristics and its traits and its functions in the same way forever. Because of certain principles, and again, we don't have time to go through this in any case, and now even less because we don't have time, because of entropy, right? Because of the waste of energy that is always happening. That's why they say that the end of the universe is going to be a big chill or a big freeze, the heat death of the universe, as they refer to it, where you're basically not able, as the universe is unable to generate more work that wastes energy, more entropy increasing work. So long story short, you're no longer going to be able to maintain the ability to generate new functionality and new existence. You may go down to the most basic, most primary particles, whatever they may be, or however it may be, but you're no longer going to be able to do anything with that. Okay, so most likely a lot of the physicists and theoretical physicists, they lean in that direction. And so if that is the case, then how can you explain that you claim, religion claims that it's going to be a corporeal, material existence and it's going to last forever? Matter cannot last forever in this matter. The answer, first and foremost, the assumption, once again, is that we are dealing with the natural order that we have in this world. And that is simply not the case, as we have explained again and again. And so if we take an example specifically about the human being, let's see what it says about, for instance, in Surah An-Nisa 4:56, when it talks about those who are in hell. And when we say those people are going to remain in hell forever, the Quran says, indeed, those who defy our signs, we shall soon make them enter a fire. As often as their skins become scorched, we shall replace those skins with other skins so that they may taste the punishment. Well, obviously, this goes against the laws of nature of this world. So how is this happening? Because we're not in this world. We're in a different world with its own order, with its own laws. Okay? And ultimately, these objections, how can we live forever when in this world nothing can live forever, and so on and so forth. Ultimately, a lot of this is because, as we said in the previous lesson, it's underestimating, underestimating the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and making light of his power, making light of his might. And that's why there's a verse in the Holy Quran, in Surah Al-Hajj 22:74, it says they did not measure God with his true measure. مَا قَدَرُ اللَّهَ حَقَّ قَدْرِهِ. They have not justly estimated Allah. They have no true grasp of what God's true measure is. For Allah is truly most strong and most mighty. When the verse talks in this way, you feel that there's almost a threat there. Do not confront Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this way and come up with these silly objections and questions as though any of this would be an impediment to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised that he would do. And with this, we have completed the lesson for today. I have a few more minutes if you would like. If there are any questions that I can take, maybe I can take a few for a few minutes, whether they have to do with today's topic or any of the subject matter we've covered until now. As we said, for the next time that we meet, inshallah, we are going to take the next topic, which is the divine promise, resurrection as a divine promise, as one argument, and then what are the rational arguments presented by the Holy Quran for the necessity of the afterlife.